Explaining the Russian Revolution. In 1914, Russia declared war on Austria-Hungary and had war declared on them by Germany due to their alliance with Serbia. World War I had begun. The working class, peasants, and serfs worked inside of the Russian army. However, they were not very well equipped, and they weren't very well trained. Because of this, the Russians would receive the most casualties during World War I, receiving around 2 million casualties. By 1917, millions of Russians were either wounded or dead, and the Russian populace was angry at Tsar Nikolai II for bringing Russia into the war. However, that was not the only reason that the populace was angry at the Tsar. They were also angry due to the fact that he had taken charge as the general for the Russian army, even though he was inexperienced, and he had allowed a peasant, known as Rasputin, to take power while he was in the army. There was also a lot of food shortages, and while he was serving in the army, many political opponents rose up. In February of 1917, on the Julian calendar, protests would break out in the streets of Petrograd, the capital of Russia at the time. People were protesting about the lack of bread due to rationing, and they were soon joined by workers who had gone on strike. The army was called to suppress the protesters, and some protesters were fired upon by the soldiers. However, many soldiers had refused to fire, and it began to seem that the soldiers had begun to mutiny against the Tsar. The Petrograd Soviet would begin to see more workers and soldiers elect representatives for their demands. The Petrograd Soviet was the city council for workers and soldiers. Now having lost the support of his army who had joined the protests, Tsar Nikolai would abdicate. From there, a new government was established, run by two parties, being the Petrograd Soviet and the Provisional Government. However, the Provisional Government would become increasingly popular, as many Russians wanted peace through World War I. However, the Provisional Government would not give them that. The Provisional Government also didn't give land to the peasants who were already protesting for more freedom. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or Vladimir Lenin, led the Bolshevik Party. The Bolsheviks were a faction of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Eventually, they would become the Communist Party of Russia. They would promise three things to appease the people and the Petrograd Soviet, being peace, bread, and land. Peace meant the end of Russia's involvement in World War I, bread meant the end of the food shortages, and land meant all the land would go to the people. He would also state all power to the Soviets, meaning that he would seize power in the name of the Soviets. This offer would entice the people, so on November 6th to 7th, the people would stage a coup against the Provisional Government during the October coup. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, would storm the Winter Palace and would arrest the Provisional Government. They would then put themselves in charge of Russia. This would bring the Russian Revolution to its end. In conclusion, the Russian Revolution was a period of social and political revolution which took place in the former Russian Empire during World War I. Thank you for watching this video on the Russian Revolution.